Utter Worldie.
In this episode called Nothing Left to Chance, I discuss with Joshua Rees his experiences of playing through the levels of the English football pyramid and the importance of nutrition to perform at the top level. Josh is a goal-scoring midfielder who has represented Arsenal FC and England at youth levels, to then having a professional career playing for several clubs including Nottingham Forest, Torquay United, Gillingham, and is currently playing for Dagenham and Redbridge. During his time as a professional, Josh also gained a first-class honours degree in sports science, and we discussed the importance of nutrition to perform at the top level. Subjects discussed include nutritional requirements, carbohydrate periodization, body composition, supplementation, and hydration for optimal performance, alongside the current research and practical application through Josh's lived experience. Welcome, Josh, and thanks for joining me.
Rich, no, good to be joining you.
I've just got your Wikipedia page up here, and I'm looking at a career that's been going on as a professional for about 10 years, and you joined Arsenal at a young age, didn't you? It looks like about from the age of 8. Would that be about right?
Yeah, I joined 8, assigned forms at 9. But yeah, I was there as a pre-academy for a year. But yeah, was there 11 years in the end. Left when I was 19.
Yeah, and then you've got on to have quite a career, really, haven't you? It looks as though you see there that you've played for Forest, Nottingham Forest, Braintree, Chelmsford, Bromley, Gillingham, for the past sort of 10 years, and you're now at Dagenham and Redbridge, yeah? Yeah,
I've had a sort of a career kind of through the levels, really. So experience of most of the levels in sort of the English pyramid, so to speak. And yeah, it's been some journey, really. Like you say, you mentioned like the old clubs I had. It feels like yesterday, really. It goes so quick. A career of a footballer, but yeah, enjoying it still.
Yeah, it certainly does. And you scored a few goals along the way, it looks like, as well.
Yeah, it's something I've always been able to do. Always been able to sort of score goals from midfield, which I think is kind of a good thing to bring to the table, especially when you're talking to managers in sort of clubs in the off season. It's kind of it's something that gives you sort of stands you out above other midfielders, especially kind of in this day and age where I think they're rare. I think they're a bit more rare now. The days of like the Frank Lampards, but now I think midfielders are. They're more concerned about how many passes they make, etc. So, but yeah. And then you've represented England under 16, 17, and then more recently England C in 2017. Yeah. Schoolboys represented England, and that was a great experience. Obviously, played with at that time some amazing teams and players that you were playing alongside. Many kind of household names now, and then obviously the C caps were obviously time in non-league, and to be fair, the setup was just as good. It's amazing what they do at England C, still going now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And you mentioned through the levels, and then my experience through the levels as well. Sometimes, and we touched on this the other day, they're small and slight, the differences, aren't they, between the levels? Sometimes between the players, you could probably put one player in a say level below in one above, and vice versa. But the differences are a little bit smaller than perhaps what most people think, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I wholeheartedly agree. From my experience, I think talent-wise, across the levels, there's not much difference. You see some players in sort of the non-league levels that have the talent to definitely play higher up. I think a lot of it, and I think a lot of people say it's to do with consistency and sort of mentality. I think that's what separates the top players from the ones that are in the levels below. The fact they can perform week in, week out, and deal with the pressures of elite football. That's what stands them out, really.
So you'd say consistency, mentality, very important, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. Especially mentality in terms of, I think football it ultimately is a game of it's decisions that you make over a 90-minute period, and if you make obviously more correct ones than bad ones, and I think the top level players are consistently correct in their decision making and the speed they can do it at, and obviously have the technique and skills to carry it out at that level. But yeah, that's what I would say myself.
No, that's a good answer, and I think it's a recurring theme in this podcast that I've been doing. That's why I brought it up. And I always remember you as being quite a bright boy, Josh. So we might put that to the test. We'll see. I'm sure you'll prove me right.
Put me under more pressure now.
Sorry, say again.
Put me under pressure now.
I'm building pressure, mate. I'm building pressure. So I understand more recently as well that you did a sports science degree, didn't you? With you came out with first class honours. So pressure's off now, mate. That's already been proven.
Yeah. Because I think I graduated maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So all that knowledge now is just gone into a bit of nothingness since. I haven't really touched up on it since. But actually, I was. It's something I started when I was 19. It took me a while, but ultimately was really pleased and proud of achieving something all the while playing professionally. Obviously, my full-time job was football, but I was able to do part-time studies, and the experience itself. You meet a lot of people. You gain a lot of knowledge. It was overall a great experience. Would definitely recommend to anyone that was willing to. And it's not easy by any means, but I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested in doing something like that.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, you were, when I say you were bright, football wasn't your only option, was it? You could have gone down the academic route a lot earlier, couldn't you? I think you had good GCSEs and good mentality back then. Yeah,
it was. Yeah, there wasn't anything kind of defined that I wanted to go down, but a lot of my peers at school and stuff, they've gone on and said I'm well. Went to university, said holding down good sort of job, so to speak. Now, but I think football was always the route I wanted to go down. Obviously, I've always had a passion for the game, and get to an age when you're 16, you can make that decision. And luckily enough, I was told by Arsenal that I was good enough to earn my scholarship, and sort of once you're there and you get sort of that taste for it full time, it's something that you feel very privileged to do, playing football sort of every day, and obviously earning a living. All your friends are doing an office 9 to 5, saying, "Oh, I wish I was doing what you're doing." So ultimately, football was always something that I wanted to do if I was given the opportunity to, and luckily I was.
Yeah, and it was through the PFA, wasn't it? Your sports science degree. They helped you with that, because I did that for a year myself, at a similar age to you. And I remember there was a professor at the time. He said to me, when you're younger, he said sports is something that you can do. You can't decide to go back to sports when you're 35, 40, and most professions, let's say sports professions, that is. So you can always go back to the educational side of it or career side of it, but I think football is obviously age dependent, where that's not the case, is it? Or is the case rather?
Yeah. The PFA were great with me in terms of they sort of put the course on. I think it's kind of was the infancy of. I think they've got a lot more courses now. They've definitely, and it's definitely more accessible. When I was doing it, it was actually quite hard. Wasn't really well known, but they were really helpful, and it was in the end, like you say, we were very grateful to have a union that were able to support me through that. And you hit the nail on the head. Really, football as sport in itself, it kind of has a finite sort of limit on what you can do, or definitely at the professional level. He said, like, your body can't carry on at the elite level, especially nowadays. Everyone's a lot fitter, a lot stronger. Like you say, education is never ending really in life. So, but while I was young and had the time in my hands, I wanted to do something. And like I said, I'm really glad I did it.
Okay, perfect. So I've drawn together just a bit of knowledge, or some research rather, based about nutrition, supplementation, energy requirements and strategies for football players. And I'm just going to put together a bit of information and just put that across, and then we can touch on those points for the next few minutes, yeah?
Yeah.
So you mentioned about fitness and intensity. So, elite players perform low intensity movements for more than 70% of the match, with approximately 150 to 250 intense actions. And over this period, a 90-minute period, that becomes less in the last 15 minutes of a game. So it's 45% lower. So this is where we're going to touch on a bit of the nutrition aspect of it, to how you would perhaps cater your diet to reduce the potential for fatigue and so on. You're a central midfielder, and on average, central midfielders run between 12 and 13 kilometres a game. Centre halves like myself were about 10 kilometres or less. So obviously you were working harder than me in terms of, say, distances covered. And then in body composition, I know you, over the years, you would have had your fat percentage taken. What was generally acceptable as a fat percentage?
I think it varies. I'm always a bit wary of the fat percentage stuff, because I think, like you say, body composition can be very individualistic in certain ways. So I've always carried probably a bit more fat than, and it's just, I think it's to do with genetics, but I've always been one of the fittest in the team. So I'm sometimes a bit wary, but I'd say at the elite level now, I think they wouldn't allow anything over sort of 10%, definitely. You hear stories like the Leeds when they had Marcelo Bielsa, and they probably weren't allowed over sort of 7%. It was really strict at the top level. I think the lower levels now, it's starting to creep in more as obviously like it becomes more professional. But yeah, especially for like the Premier League players now, I'd imagine they've got to be below 8%, I'd say.
Okay, because back in my day, it was between 8 and 12 was acceptable. But I agree with you, genetics-wise, I think I was a bit less injury prone, let's say, if I had a higher fat percentage. So if I was a bit more robust, I would put the analogy similar to like a sports car. More things would go wrong with it because it was more finely tuned.
Yeah.
But in the balance of that, being fitter and quicker, you're probably able to play at a better level, obviously being fitter, if that makes sense. Probably more durable with a bit more body fat, but to a certain extent, the lower it was, to be able to perform athletically at a better level. We can put that together. Would you agree with that, Josh?
Yeah, I think... I 100%. Within your line of thinking as well. I found myself personally, but I think if you're going to perform at the top level now, you need to be, like you say, you perform to like a racing car. You need to be like an F1 car, like streamlined, nothing left to chance, in order to be performing at the highest speeds for a long duration of time. And they do it for now 60. They've got 60 games. If you're a Man City, so to speak, in the season, you've got to be able to do that. Duration of the season. So it's very, very demanding physically, and you need to be in the top shape to do it.
Yeah, and I think the average values I've got here 10.6, 11.2, and 10%. So I think you were spot on with those values and valuations. Okay, so in terms of, say, energy expenditure in a game, I think it's usually around, an approximate value is around 1,107 kilocalories to be, expelled during a game. And then what I'm going to talk about now is, so the main thing we say with the energy expenditure and energy is carbohydrate, periodization, and carbohydrates. In terms of how you would, well, I suppose individually how you would do it as well, Josh. So I'm going to go through like what the daily requirements are, pre-training, during training, after training, and then I'll say what the recommendations are, and then perhaps if we can put it into a context, say perhaps how you'd prepare. So these are valuations. So I'm just going to say that, so for a carbohydrate, it will say here, it will say 5 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight a day. But those figures, sometimes it's useful to put them into context. So for example, a slice of bread is 10 to 20 grams, depending on the bread type of a carbohydrate. Baked potato, 40 grams. 1 cup of cooked pasta, 45 grams. Protein, so a third of a cup of rice or pasta is about 3 grams, and half a cup of nuts is anywhere between 4 and 6 grams. So the daily requirements of an adult for carbohydrate intake is between 5 and 10 per kilogram of body weight per day, and it's important to periodise that dependent on the needs of training sessions. The protein would be between 1.2 and 2, but the idea of, say, with the carbohydrates is that you're trying to gain access, basically, to energy, and that's important in sports because it's the muscle glycogen in the substrate that's necessary for the energy production. So if that's your daily requirement, let's go towards, so before training and matches. So before training and matches, you would try and go for, say, between 1 and 4 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate, and then a protein 0.25 to 0.4. Obviously, you would adjust dependent on the timing and the demands of that. So what would you do perhaps before training and matches? What would you tend to do?
So it kind of has varied over the years, but what I'd say I'd do now, and this is probably more based to like what you just said, like a bit more knowledge now. I've had 5 nutritionists in my career now, so you kind of gain knowledge, and I think the knowledge is always expanding as we get sort of more. There's more research. So I'd say my routine now is before a game, the night before, I definitely start to get the carbohydrates on board. So it would be like a pasta-based meal, and it wouldn't be like overly heavy, but would probably be the biggest out of sort of the subsequent meals before my game. And then in the morning, I actually never used to eat breakfast. I used to have a pre-match meal around 11, 4 hours before a 3 o'clock kickoff. But actually, now I think it's been encouraged by sort of nutritionists I've spoken to recently to have that meal. So it's sort of like a breakfast meal. Wouldn't be too heavy. I'd say it could be anything. I usually have it quite light. It might be some yogurt and some fruit just to keep the metabolism going. Said it's got sort of the some vitamins, a bit of sort of some fats in there, and then by 11 would be kind of my pre-match meal. Would be a similar base to what would be the night before. Maybe not as heavy because there's obviously less time to digest, but a similar sort of a brown pasta with sort of some sauce, maybe a little bit of chicken, some protein, and that would usually get me through. And that's just and then it becomes a routine, really. I think people, I'm talking less from a nutrition stance, but more from a footballer's mentality. What you'll find is a lot of footballers have a routine that they've stuck by probably for, I'd say, a number of years, and it will take a lot for them to deviate from that unless they see some massive change in performance. Now, I think at the top level, like you say, their nutritionists are on hand all the time, and there's probably data where they could be shown these top level footballers be like, look, you did this, or we've changed your diet, and we've given you like a blood test, and this is improved. Well, not being funny, at my level, you don't get that. So a lot of it is based on feeling and how you felt. I used to really loads before so the 11 o'clock pre-match meal, and it got to a point where I was actually feeling quite heavy in games. My idea was always I'd rather overeat than undereat, because there's nothing worse than being kind of malnourished before a game and you don't feel you can gain the energy stores. But actually, I think you need to find that balance, because also feeling a bit heavy during games was a struggle, especially like you said, I'm a midfielder. So I kind of needed to be on the move all the time. So I think it's more just experience. I've gradually got to a routine now where I'm fairly comfortable with it. As for training, it wouldn't be, obviously, most of the time training's in the morning, so I'm not going to be doing a bowl of pasta every morning. It would be, it could be toast with sort of some jam. Peanut butter is always a good thing. I think I said it's kind of like something slow burning. I try to eat maybe a couple of hours as early as I can before training as well. Don't want to be carrying too much on the stomach.
No, Josh, you're spot on with everything you said. It's individualised, and when you said that before, like the periodization. So the day before, the advice is 5 to 10 kilograms per kilogram a day. But also that the last meal before a game, 3 to 4 hours, and I think you said 3. So exactly that's what you'd want to try and do, or as a we'll say a generalisation, because we are all slightly different, dependent on various other variables to take into account. As you say, you've kind of figured out what's right for you in terms of how to perform, not feeling too heavy, but having enough energy available so you've got that accessible during the game. And then you also mentioned fat. So fat intake should be at least about 20% of the total energy intake from the diet as a whole. In terms of what you do during a game, what do they tend to do now at the levels that you've played at? So would they obviously the water is we'll come on to that, but in terms of food during the game, or supplements or sachets of some sort of glucose or sucrose, or a powder, do they tend to do that?
Yeah. No, it's very readily available. You get the glycogen gels now at half time. There'll always be sort of the sweets, and like obviously people might be surprised, oh, you shouldn't be eating sweets, but obviously it's sort of quick release carbohydrates and sugars, and they'll always sort of be available. A lot of it comes through the electrolyte drinks as well. Actually, you're going to get onto hydration. That's massive as well. But yeah, all readily kind of available, to be fair. And obviously post-match nutrition as well. I suppose you're going to lead into that as well.
Yeah, don't get ahead of me, Josh. You'll expose me, otherwise you're getting exposed me. Okay, yeah. So let's talk then about. So we said during the match. So we said that those things are readily available. But you personally, do you use anything, or do you take anything?
I'm not a big fan of sort of the gels and stuff like that. I'll be honest, and it's not to do with. It's just, again, this personal preference. I've had them before and just didn't sit well while I was playing. So I'm much more inclined to more the hydration side. I'll have at half time, I'll have like an electrolyte drink and probably finish that off. And that will give me sort of the boost going into the second half if I need it. I never tend to eat anything at half time.
Okay, no, fair enough. I think the water side of it. So I remember that water has been described as one of the most important ergogenic aids in sports. So ergogenic being sports performance, and the advice is for men basically between 2 to 2.5 litres if you're sedentary, to about 3.2 litres in a warm environment, up to about 6 litres. Obviously that's dependent on the variables we mentioned, such as temperature, so the environment, also body mass, I would imagine, has quite a bit to play with that. You'd probably lose more as a bigger individual and so on. And then the pre-hydration programs, the advice is to slowly drink beverages to approximately 5 to 7 milliliters per kilogram, one per body weight, at least 4 hours before the exercise task. And you should, if you should replenish those stores to about 100 to 125%, and that can be measured. So your water loss is obviously with body weight, and that's how you would try and keep an idea of how hydrated you are, and also by the colour of your urine and so on, and things like that. I'm sure you've been spoken about to yourself in the past.
Hydration is probably the key thing for me that I always am on. I mean, food is, you get in the routine, but I think hydration is the one that's always been, and it's to the point now where it's just become like second nature. I always trying to make sure I roughly probably drink about 1,500 millilitres to about 2 litres in the morning before I train, definitely before a match day. I've got a 4 litre bottle of water. So ideally you kind of drink half of it before and then post-exercise, try and finish it off. And then, like you say, you kind of got to replenish more once you've finished exercise, especially now we're talking in July pre-season. The temperatures are hitting mid-25s. Hydration's massive. And like you say, usually try and, I say, you weigh yourself post exercise, and you can lose anything up to sort of a kilo, 1.5 kilos, and then your aim is probably to put that back on in terms of hydrating yourself. Because for me it's so key, especially for like injury prevention as well. It's massive.
Yeah, you're spot on. The things that we've talked about have been the macronutrients, so the fats, the proteins, and the carbohydrates, and mainly the carbohydrates. But if you move on to the micronutrients, I know that vitamin D is important for regulation of calcium and phosphorus absorption and metabolism. But it's important to maintain bone health. And I think if there's been an absence or there's a lack of vitamin D, people are more likely to get musculoskeletal injuries and stress fractures. So that's from a micronutrient point of view. The evidence in terms of, say, other micronutrients is still a little bit inconclusive in terms of how you do that. But other bits of research have touched on, say, caffeine as being a useful ergogenic aid. Have you ever used caffeine or anything like that?
I'm not a caffeine fan, so
no, you don't have tea or coffee, Josh. No,
I'm not a tea or coffee drinker either, which is probably more affected me socially than physically, because everyone seems to like to go out for a coffee, especially footballers. They're quite keen on their coffee and tea drinking, but it's never been for me. But you said with all like anything. It's trying to find the alternatives what suit you in terms of, like you sound like the ergonomic aids. It's probably I'll try and make up for it in a different way. If anything, yeah.
Would you have an apple ties?
Yeah. Well, I can stomach a green tea. That's probably the best, or herbal tea, something like that. That's the best you're going to get out of me. No, tea or coffee is not for me. Even when I was younger, everyone's like, "Oh, you'll like it when you're older." Like, just still, no. Any love for it, no.
No, and then I know some people use creatine. You use creatine at all?
I'm a creatine user, yeah. I said with my protein, I was a scoop of creatine. I in terms of benefiting performance, I've always felt it's helped me in terms of like repeated, especially like anaerobic performance, like sprints, weightlifting, stuff like that. Creatine's helped me in that respect. Yeah,
of course, because you produce that endogenously, don't you? Your creatine anyway. So, but if you found that it's useful to supplement, I know there is some evidence for that as well. But from your point of view, from someone who doesn't drink tea or coffee, or intends to overindulge, the creatine is perhaps the one thing that you would use.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I use it now to this day. Yeah, I think I started using it maybe when I was 21, and actually probably I'd say that around that time I was probably physically one of the best I've ever been in terms of how quick I was. I've always been fit. I've never been the quickest, but at that time, I was really quick. I was in the gym loads, working on my power, and said the nutritionist at the time put sort of like creatine as a supplement in my diet for the first time, and it said I was able to complete a lot of power, physically demanding power sessions, and in games hit a lot of high speeds, and I think I had a lot to do with it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to get an endorsement in the post here, I reckon, from the end of this podcast. You may get some free creatine, or you may get a sponsorship deal, yeah? I think that's what we'll work on. Hopefully, yeah, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. And then going back to your time as an academy player, and then this is probably the last bit we'll say about the diet and nutrition, is that the research that I mentioned, some of the reviews, that they found that a lot of the elite youth soccer players didn't meet the current carbohydrate guidelines, so that they weren't getting enough, basically, and that the younger age groups, 13 to 14-year-olds, were getting more in comparison to the 17, 18, so that would have been the youth team players. So perhaps there's something that, the diet and the nutrition, I know it's looked at, could certainly perhaps like most things, be improved upon. And that's not to criticise the people doing it out there. It's just what this study has found. But you're very clued up, aren't you, Josh? I think that sports science degree's done you very well. I think you've answered those questions excellently.
Well, as said, I'm only really talking from just my experience, but it doesn't surprise me that the younger age groups now are so much more clued on, because it's kind of they're indoctrinated into this sort of nutritionist sports science, and it's part of their lives. Well, when I was growing up, I'll be honest, you never knew about it. It just wasn't there. All we cared about was just getting on a football pitch, running around. You've got so much now to think about, and they're very lucky in a sense that they've got all this at their disposal. So the only reason I've sort of learned about it is through, like you say, a 5 or 6 year degree. These kids now have got, they're so lucky that they've got all this support and this knowledge, and hopefully, like you said, their performances can be obviously superior.
Yeah, absolutely. And then touching on that, so your time, what would your advice be to someone who's just starting out, let's say? I know that's a general question, but what would your advice be?
I think more general, like nothing too specific. It's I think you've got to enjoy it, for number one. I definitely did. So I said it wasn't a hard decision. I got to 16, and like you said, I probably could have done other things, but because I enjoyed it, I knew that that's the path I wanted to be on. And then it's literally, I'm not going to like try and reinvent the wheel. It is as simple as you've got to work your hardest every day and give yourself the best possible chance. Football is an extremely difficult sport. The statistics probably tell you to make a career out of, let alone play at the top level. So you're competing against millions of people, especially if you're an elite club. Not only you're going to be competing against the people within the country, you're going to be competing against sort of kids globally, because the resources some of these clubs have now, just to pluck a kid from a sort of a European teams from South America, Asia, Africa. It means the statistics are against you, so you've got to work your utmost best, and then, like I said, have that and combine it with that enjoyment, and also you're going to need some luck. There's no other way of like putting it. You're going to need sometimes, but I said the harder you work, then the luckier you get. I think in that sense.
I agree. I think there is an element of luck to it, and with the best intentions, you can work as hard as you like, do all the right things. You have to be sometimes in the right place at the right time to progress that. And I've seen people over the years, people I played with, people that I've seen, that perhaps I would say, given didn't explore, playing in other divisions, and following your career. I was glad that you did, because I always saw you and thought you were a very, talented player with a good attitude, and I'm glad that you, played for as long as you have.
Yeah, and that's what we've all said. It's not easy in terms of in a career. Like you say, I said when we talk about mentality, I think it's probably the most testing. That's the most testing part of the game. I think more than anything, it's. Physically, you're going to be put through some tough times, whether, like you say, it'd be a pre-season or there'll be certain games. So I had a game in last season that went to extra time against a team that I'd say had about 90% possession. So yeah, that's a tough game. But mentally, I think that's where the game is the most tough, because you're going to go through scenarios, and there's no football. A lot can happen in football that. In a normal life, someone's lifespan might take 20 years to happen. While it can have all those emotions you get in that 20-year lifespan can happen within football in a week, if that makes sense. So yeah,
absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to finish on a quote, Josh. It was by Roger Williams, who was a religious leader in the 1600s, and we've spoke about sports science and diet and nutrition. And he said that the human body heals itself, and nutrition provides the resources to accomplish the task. So I think that just encompasses the importance of nutrition in sports and football. And I think you've, put across a lived experience of how and get the right nutrients on board and the right energy intake, and how it being an individual is important, and to doing what's right, what works for you essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Josh. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated. And as you can hear, this chair is creaking like me, so I will leave you to it. Thanks very much.
No, thank you, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Utter Worldie.